We are also focusing on agriculture and agricultural processing, especially the agri-food industry and energy. In short, there are many sectors that are open, and we need the brains of our brothers to come here and build the necessary industries to process our raw materials. It should be us feeding the world, not us having to be seen as beggars in the eyes.
Burkina Faso was a country where rice is not just food, it is survival. For millions of families, the price of a single sack decides how many meals they can afford in a week. Over the past few years, that price has only gone one way: up. Markets grew tense. Households cut portions. Fear of the next increase became normal. But toward the end of 2025, something unexpected happened. Reports began to emerge that rice was getting cheaper, not in headlines, but from the fields themselves. Farmers were suddenly selling a 50-kilogram bag for less than before. At the same time, economists started noticing something even stranger. Prices across the economy were falling. Inflation had turned negative. For a country used to pressure, this was shocking. Was Burkina Faso finally catching a break, or was something bigger unfolding beneath the surface? Let's find out. It didn't start with an announcement. It started with farmers. In the rice-growing zones outside Bama, Suru, and the valleys around Bobo Dioulasso, traders began hearing the same thing again and again. The price is lower this time. A 50-kilogram sack that had been moving for around 18,000 CFA francs was now changing hands at about 17,000 CFA. To someone outside Burkina Faso, that might sound like nothing. But here, where rice is the backbone of daily meals, even 1,000 francs is a signal. It means something in the system has shifted. Farmers don't lower prices out of kindness. They do it when the supply is strong enough that holding back no longer makes sense. And supply, this season, was strong. Fields that used to give modest yields were coming in heavier. Piles of sacks sat longer at collection points. Trucks were leaving full. Word spread fast, not through newspapers but through phones. Photos of rice bags, captions saying it's finally dropping. Soon, the story reached the cities. People began walking into markets with cautious hope. Maybe this time the pressure would ease. Maybe the endless climb had finally cracked. But the markets told a different story. In Ouagadougou, Bobo Dioulasso, and Koudougou, the same bags were still selling for 24,000, 30,000, or even 36,000 CFA francs. For families, nothing felt cheaper. The bowls at home didn't suddenly fill more. The relief everyone wanted wasn't there. That's when confusion set in. How could rice be cheaper in the countryside but still expensive in the city? Were farmers exaggerating? Were traders lying? Or was this just another rumor that wouldn't survive the reality of daily life? Yet the reports kept coming. Not just from one area, not just from one group. The same figures repeated: 17,000 CFA at the farm gate. This wasn't gossip, it was a price signal. And in food markets, price signals matter more than speeches. They tell you when supply is winning and when shortages are losing. But what people didn't yet see was that this wasn't just about rice. Beneath this small drop was a much bigger shift moving through Burkina Faso's economy. Something strong enough to push not only rice, but food prices as a whole downward. For now, all anyone could see was the surface. Cheaper sacks in fields, expensive sacks in markets, and a growing sense that something didn't add up. So the first real question wasn't whether rice had become cheaper. It clearly had, somewhere. The real question was, what was happening beneath the surface that made farmers cut prices while markets refused to follow? What was happening beneath the surface was that the entire food economy was cooling, not just rice. The farm gate drop wasn't an accident. It was the first visible crack in a much larger shift. By the time farmers were accepting 17,000 CFA francs per sack, economists were already seeing something rare in Burkina Faso. Prices across the country were falling. In September 2025, official data showed inflation had slipped to around minus 3.9%. That means, on average, things were cheaper than a year before. Even more striking, food inflation dropped to about minus 4.7%. For a country used to fighting rising costs, this was almost unheard of. So when rice prices dipped at the farm, they weren't acting alone. They were moving with the tide. The system was easing, but markets don't react instantly. Traders don't rewrite price boards just because numbers change in reports. They remember past shortages. They price in risk. They carry stock bought at higher costs. Transporters still pay for fuel. Storage still costs money. So city prices stayed high, even while the foundation beneath them was shifting. This is why people felt the contradiction. Farmers saying prices are down, while buyers saw nothing change. Both were right. They were just standing at different points of the same chain. Still, one mystery remained. Deflation doesn't appear out of nowhere. Prices don't fall across an economy unless something powerful pushes them. Demand could collapse, but that wasn't happening. People were still eating. Markets were still busy, so if demand hadn't vanished, the only force left was supply. Food had to be flooding the system. Rice, maize, millet, sorghum. Something had clearly changed in the fields. The question was no longer whether rice prices dropped, or even whether inflation turned negative. Those were now facts. The real question became, what exactly happened in Burkina Faso's harvest to push so much food into the system that it dragged prices down across the economy? What happened was simple. Burkina Faso harvested more food than it had in years. The 2025-26 season didn't just improve, it surged. Cereal production, which includes rice, maize, millet, and sorghum, is projected to jump by about 17.6%, reaching roughly 7.14 million tons. That kind of increase doesn't quietly pass through markets, it forces its way in. Rice was at the heart of it. Depending on the region, output is expected to rise anywhere between 4% and 25%. That means in some areas, farmers were pulling in almost a quarter more rice than the year before. Fields that used to barely cover household needs were now producing a surplus that had to be sold. And when farmers rushed to sell, prices bend. That's why the farm gate price slipped to 17,000 CFA francs. Not because farmers suddenly became generous, but because holding stock made less sense when everyone else also had bags to move. Supply was competing against supply. This is the kind of change that doesn't come from luck. It comes from expanded cultivation, better seeds, improved irrigation in lowland areas, and farmers learning to squeeze more from each hectare. Quiet improvements, season after season, finally reach a tipping point. Once that tipping point hit, it didn't just touch rice. It pulled down maize. It eased millet. It softened the entire cereal basket. That's how food inflation slid into negative territory. That's how the economy began to cool. But abundance has its own shadow. When too much food hits the market at once, farmers earn less per bag. Storage becomes a problem. Traders hesitate, fearing prices will fall further, and governments start worrying. If prices keep sliding, could this turn into something dangerous? Because falling prices feel good at first, but long-lasting deflation can hurt producers, slow investment, and signal deeper weakness. So even as people celebrated cheaper rice at the farm, another question started to form in the background, one that mattered just as much as today's relief. If production is rising this fast and prices are already dropping, is Burkina Faso heading into a future where deflation becomes the new normal? Let's pause for a second to say big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. No, Burkina Faso is not sliding into permanent deflation. The price drops of 2025 look dramatic because they are rare, not because they mark a new era. Economists studying the country's data see this as a temporary dip driven mainly by food supply, not a collapse in demand or economic activity. Projections from international institutions suggest inflation will turn positive again. For 2025 as a whole, forecasts sit roughly around 1 to 2.7%, and for 2026 around 2.4 to 3.4%. In other words, after this unusual moment of falling prices, the economy is expected to normalize. That tells us something important. What Burkina Faso is experiencing is not deflation because people stopped buying. It's deflationary because food suddenly became more abundant. And that kind of deflation doesn't last forever. Why? Because even if rice and cereals stay plentiful, other costs keep pushing upward. Fuel doesn't get cheaper just because harvests are good. Imported goods still depend on global prices and currencies. Transport costs remain heavy. Urban demand keeps growing. All these forces slowly pull inflation back into positive territory. So the rice boom can slow inflation, but it cannot erase the pressures of the wider economy. This is why experts don't expect rice prices to keep falling year after year. The harvest surge gives relief, but it doesn't rewrite the whole system. Over time, prices stabilize. Some rise, others flatten. The market finds balance again. That means what Burkina Faso is living through now is a window, a moment where strong local production buys breathing space, not a permanent state of cheap living. And that brings the story back to people. If inflation is coming back, and if rice won't keep getting cheaper forever, then what does this harvest boom really mean for families who are still paying 24,000 to 36,000 CFA francs in the markets today? Is this just a short pause before pressure returns? Or does this rice surge change something deeper about Burkina Faso's food future? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. It changes stability more than it changes today's price. For families walking through markets and still seeing rice at 24,000, 30,000, even 36,000 CFA francs, the harvest boom doesn't feel like a victory. Nothing magical has happened at the stall. The bowl at home isn't suddenly fuller. So it's fair to ask what all this talk of surplus really means. But here's the hard truth. Without this surge in production, prices would likely be far worse. When food supply grows slowly and demand rises, markets panic. Traders hoard, prices jump fast. That's how you end up with sudden spikes that crush households. What Burkina Faso's harvest has done is stop that spiral before it started. More rice in the system means fewer shortages. Fewer shortages mean traders have less power to squeeze buyers. Even if prices don't crash, they stop exploding. That's the quiet protection most people never see. So the rice boom isn't about miracles. It's about buffers. It means that when transport costs rise, rice is there. When borders tighten, rice is there. When global prices jump, rice is there. The country isn't forced to scramble for imports at any cost. It can breathe. And over time, that breathing space matters. Stable supply slowly pulls prices toward reality. It reduces fear. It gives room for policies, storage systems, and better distribution to catch up. It doesn't fix markets overnight, but it makes fixing them possible. That's why the farm gate drop is important, even if cities haven't fully felt it yet. It shows the foundation is shifting. Once the base moves, the top eventually follows. Still, this raises a deeper issue. If the biggest benefit of this harvest isn't cheap rice today, but security tomorrow, then this story isn't just about food prices anymore. It's about something more strategic. So the next question becomes, is Burkina Faso's rice boom simply an agricultural success, or is it the beginning of a new kind of economic power? It's the power to feed yourself. That's what this rice story is really about. Not 1,000 CFA here or there, not a brief moment of deflation, but the quiet shift in who controls survival. When a country depends on imports for its staple food, it lives at the mercy of borders, currencies, and foreign markets. One shock, a war, a shipping disruption, a currency slide, and prices explode overnight. Families pay for crises they didn't create. Burkina Faso has lived that reality for years. But a surge in local rice production changes the balance. Every extra sack grown at home is one less sack begged from outside, one less exposure to global price storms, one more layer of protection for ordinary people. That is food power. It doesn't mean markets become cheap forever. It means they become harder to break. It means traders can't easily weaponize scarcity. It means governments have room to act instead of panicking. It means households don't face hunger the moment the world sneezes. The farm gate dropped to 17,000 CFA francs, the brief fall into negative inflation, and the projected surge to over 7 million tons of cereals. These are not isolated statistics. They are signs of a system beginning to rely more on itself. Even when inflation returns, as forecasts suggest it will in 2026, this foundation remains. The country will enter that period stronger than before, not weaker. This is why the rice story matters beyond markets. It speaks to dignity, to resilience, to a future where food is not a constant emergency but a managed resource. Burkina Faso is not there yet. Roads are still rough, storage is still weak, markets are still imperfect. But for the first time in a long while, the direction is clear. The fields are starting to carry the weight of the nation. And that leaves one final question, not just for Burkina Faso, but for Africa as a whole. What happens when countries stop depending on the world to feed them and start building their future from their own soil? Let us know in the comment section. Is this a win? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about, the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.